Hello, English 1 students who are preparing a persuasive paper. Good to see you. Okay, let's talk about how things are going. So, as always, feel free to give me a call as you're working on this. And I really want this to be a good experience. And so, in some ways, I want it to be a fun time. You need to think hard and give careful thought to what you want to say. But I also want you to enjoy it. We want to be able to enjoy each other's persuasive argument. So let's think about where you should be by this point. So by this point, you should have decided on a topic. Going back to page 4, I may need to tilt this thing just a little here. Kind of move it over and give you a little. Okay, so going back to page 4, you should have written a proposition. Your proposition should include your topic and the side you are taking. You're going to read all about that on page 4. So you've made, and this is going to be a declarative statement. You're making a statement. So it's what you're going to talk about and which side you're taking on this issue. Then on page 5, you are supposed to come up with, and you're supposed to have this done, okay? I'm just reviewing and reminding. 5 good arguments in favor of your position. They can be arguments that are logical. That means they can be proven. You have statistics, scientific proof. You have the Bible as authority. This isn't the Bible, but pretending this would be the Bible. So they can be logical arguments. They can also be emotional. That is, you appeal to your consideration emotionally on how this is affecting people. So you have, you're supposed to write, you need to write 5 arguments to support your proposition. Out of those 5, you need to choose the 3 best. Now, these are primary arguments, so they're main ideas. Of course, you're going to have many subpoints, but these are going to be, then you pick your best 3, and then you get busy finding notes to support these 3. And you find your notes by doing some research on your topic, doing some reading, some things you have thought through yourself can get included in here. And obviously things from the Bible. You want to be biblically based in your thinking. So any person who's going to be a clear thinker on any life issue, it needs to be based biblically. We need a Christocentric life worldview. That means it's Christ-centered. So all that we do or think is centered on the teachings of Jesus. That's what we mean by Christocentric. Okay, so that's how you need to approach this paper. It needs to be presented, and it may not make sense for a non-believer. In fact, your paper will be very different from what a non-believer would write. And you perhaps can say, well, but what I'm talking about isn't really Christian or non-Christian. Well, I'm not sure those kind of things exist. A Christian should always have a unique perspective on life issues. Okay, so you're choosing your best 3, and now you're getting notes on that. You're getting material to support these 3 arguments, to flesh it out. And of course, keep those on note cards. Make sure if you're drawing from sources that you record those sources well. Now this time we're not requiring a certain number of sources, but any place you get information that you need to to credit, make sure you record that. Okay, so that kind of brings us up to today and what you should have done already. Okay, so I'm kind of looking here at lesson 6, so I'm at page 9. So the next thing that we need to do is try to think about what's the best order to put these arguments in. So you have 3 that you were supposed to have chosen. And they're suggesting here that you always want to end your talk on the real clincher. So you need to look at your 3 arguments and you decide which one's the strongest argument, which one is next, and which one is the weakest. So if you want your strong clincher to be the last one, so you end up putting number 1 last. And then because you want to begin with a good point and get things started on the right foot, you should put your second strongest as number 2. And then end up putting your weakest argument in the middle. So strongest last, next as your first one, and your weakest in the middle. By the way, before I end this video, I'm going to give you the answers for lesson 1 that I told you, I promised you I would last week. And so, hang on to the end of the video and I'll give you those answers if I don't forget it. You call me if I forget it to make sure I give you those. Okay, so then once you have those in order, you're ready to divide up your note cards and you're ready to write out your outline. Put subpoints under your outline. And they're showing you how to do that on page 10. And they give you little examples of sorting out issues, sorting out arguments, numbering that 1, 2, 3. You work on that. Kind of that, not right or wrong maybe, but something to get you thinking. Now, as you get over to lesson 7, you have an important aspect to consider. And maybe it's just kind of teaching you some of the same thing again. But when you get to lesson 7, they're saying there's a few things in your preparation that you want to watch out for. And fallacies back in lesson 1, some of this is similar to fallacies, but it's a little different. So number 1, watch out for prejudice. This is on page 11, lesson 7. So prejudice is a real something to be aware of and watch out for. Okay, so prejudice. Prejudice is when you prejudge a situation without considering all the facts. So you know what you believe, but you haven't really thought about it. You just know it's true. So, for example, my son, Stephen, he's absolutely convinced that John Deere's are the best, and Case IH and most of the other brands are absolutely junk. Okay, well, I try to tell him this. So far, I haven't been too successful, but that's a clear example of prejudice. Certainly not examining all the facts, certainly not putting things to the test, not having even experienced them, and have drawn a conclusion about the matter. So that's prejudice. So anytime you have a feeling about something without having thought it through, without having researched it and given it careful consideration, but you already know what you think, that's prejudice. And that, unfortunately, will come through when you talk about it. So you need to think about, do I have any prejudice? Do I have a belief system about this issue that I really don't know if I can support it? That I really haven't thought about. I just kind of know how I think. So you need to watch out for that. Okay, secondly, you have lack of credibility. And this really follows. So when you start just kind of talking and revealing your prejudice and showing that, this is how I feel about this, but you can't back it up. And so, when you show an openness to know the truth, that gives credibility. So you're a sincere seeker. You want to know the truth about this. You feel deeply about this. And you're trying hard to understand it well. That gives credibility to what you have to say. Even if the person listening doesn't end up agreeing with you, they can still appreciate your perspective. But when you just kind of mouth off and you give a bunch of opinions that can't be solidly based and you haven't even really thought it through well, you're just talking about what you think, you lose credibility. Lacks credibility. So, if I could just sum up this thing of credibility, when you get up to talk, when you present your paper, make sure you know your stuff. Make sure you know what you're talking about. You've thought about it, and you've considered the different ways of looking at this, and you've researched it, and you know what you're saying. Now, nobody can know everything there is to know, and we are human. So we can still be in error about what we think, and not everyone is going to agree with us. But as well as you could, you have researched it, you have looked at the issue, you've thought it through, and you've logically arrived at your opinion, your understanding of this issue and what you think needs to be done. So they give some examples on even how you present something as not showing good credibility. So you have Marina here. She's talking about why a person should not be proud. And she says the book of Proverbs talks about not being proud. That's just kind of weak. But good credibility, Marina says, throughout the book of Proverbs, believers are warned against pride. Perhaps the most familiar warning comes from Proverbs 16:18, which says, pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Now, what she just did here, she didn't just make this statement. The book of Proverbs talks a lot about pride. I mean, really? No. She says it's all through Proverbs. And here's a good example. She quotes it. She shows it to you. If you're giving that argument, it's one thing just to make a statement, but prove that to me. I mean, really? I want to have some evidence. So that's what we're talking about. To give you credibility, you need to be able to back up what you're saying. Okay, if you get over on top of page 12, they just have a list of kind of these things you've thought about, your proposition, what's propaganda, what's prejudice, what's appealing to majority, what's credibility, what is a fallacy, and what is subjectivism. And then you match them. And I'll try to give you those answers next week. Okay, then we go to the introduction and the conclusion on page 12, and this really is just about the same as you've done in every other thing you've ever written. So how do you want to get started? Well, you need something attention-grabbing. So you need to make a statement, you need to ask a question. Perhaps that's a good way. You could give a short anecdote. That's a little story that has maybe some humor in it, but maybe it's really packed with emotion. Have you ever considered? And you give this little story or a little account of a hypothetical possibility. And you get everyone quiet and their eyes are riveted on what you're about to say. And so by doing that, to get your audience's attention, you need to have it presented in such a way that they want to know this. This is something that would help them in life if they would know the answer to what you're going to talk about. And present it in that way, begin in that way. You can start with a quote, you can start with a fact, maybe a statistic, a question, or a Bible verse. In the Bible, so-and-so place, it says, have you ever thought about the implications of that verse? And right away you have people thinking, well, no. I mean, what is with that? So you have the wheels turning. Okay, so then that brings you to starting to write and doing the rough draft. And you can read that yourself. So I think I'm going to leave you for this week again. And again, if you have questions, feel free to call. And so God bless your efforts. I hope you're finding joy in doing this. Thank you.